Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to ETH Talk, your weekly look at the market in ETH Online. And we are changing things up a little bit because CCP has introduced the market ticker to the market window. So I'm going to try and incorporate it into ETH Talk, but it must also be said it is not yet optimal. I think that CCP should give us many more options when it comes to the ticker, both in its look, because it's a little bit small for ETH Talk, for instance, but also especially for the products that you can incorporate into the ticker, so that you can have the products that you choose. Whether they do this through the quick bar, that would be a possible solution, or through some other means. I think that they should definitely add this option. Another thing that I think we will want to know is maybe more details and possibly settings on exactly how the changes are calculated, where the data is coming from, what the ranges are, and again, if CCP could then allow us, for instance, to set it up so that it only shows JITA prices or shows universal prices, all of that information, it would be good that CCP allows us to do more with the market ticker, I think. Anyways, we are here for the market, of course, and as always, we're gonna start out with plex at 125. 125, there we go, and plex is at 3,100,000 for the sellers, 3 million for the buyers, but that's in JITA only. Let's take a look at what's happening in the player-owned trade hubs. Just above 3 million for the sellers and just below 3 million for the buyers. Very narrow margin that we can see, so I'm actually expecting pretty much a sideways movement here, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So a bit of hesitation on the plex market before the expansion. I guess people don't know exactly which way to go. Some people will be investing, but some people will be willing to sell their plex at this current price range. Volumes, I would say down maybe a little bit here. We've got a couple of days where volumes are definitely down, and there's another thing to keep in mind. I got an ad in the mail from CCP that you could, for instance, train a second character like at half price or something like that. I mean, there are definitely sales going on as well, which is probably going to keep the prices from going completely out of control before the expansion. I think the next few weeks, especially the first few weeks before the expansion of October, after the new event and after the launch of ETH Valkyrie, might be pretty interesting when it comes to plex. I'm just not sure what to expect. Usually before an expansion we do see a pretty big increase in price, but here we can clearly see that that happened towards the end of July. So maybe this was our early peak. But I personally do expect that will go up again towards maybe like the 3.5 million mark towards the expansion. But I'm not entirely sure here. We're definitely pretty uncharacteristically flat at the moment when it comes to the plexes. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificates. That one needed to correct a little bit, heading towards 1.5 billion, which is pretty much the same price as running a character on plex. Wasn't very sustainable if plex aren't going anywhere, so these are dipping back down below 1.4 billion, being sold for just below 1.4 billion, and the buyers are at 1.3 billion, 40 million ISK. So that's I would say a healthier margin. There's still some room, I think, for these to decrease a bit more, although a difference of 100 million between this and plex may just be the right margin. And we can see that the volumes here are still pretty decent, especially historically speaking. So here we had these massive sales from CCP, which caused volumes to increase and prices to decrease quite massively. And since then, although we have some pretty bad days as well, volumes at least are better than what they were before all of this. Next up, we have the skill extractors. Of course, this should follow the pattern of plex very closely, and it does so. So here pretty flat at around the 340 million mark on the chart. 340 for the sellers, 340 for the buyers, well 336 here for a buyer in station. The others are not tradable from within JITA, so but yeah, again, lots of competition. I'm not sure if we should disregard these buy orders because they're only one jump out. So, you know, just carry 6 skill extractors, and if you want to sell them for a couple million extra, needing to do just one jump, I think that they'll get filled, but yeah, very narrow margin again in this period of stable skill extractor prices. This is of course 100% due to what's happening with Plex at the moment. Then the skill injectors, that could be interesting. All right, flat as well. So apparently at the moment people are not jumping to the skill injectors to get their refinery skills in, which have been deployed. And this may be a quick warning as well. If you are running a POS on a moon and you're planning to switch to a refinery with the expansion, make sure that you grab all the skills and that you start training them, because you can do so right now, and otherwise you might not be ready when the expansion hits. And so these large skill injectors are being sold for 780 million ISK, going down towards up towards Cheetah prices. It's almost 800 million for the sellers here, and the buyers are at 768 million ISK. So again, a decently small margin. We used to have a much bigger one than 12 million. On the large skill injectors, and yeah, 800 million for a skill injector, heading towards that 1 billion. If Plex increase enough, then we'll obviously see that one day. But as always, I keep these in mind as a possible investment instead of putting everything in Plex, because they have this added possible interest, possible demand, just because there are of course skill points added in here as well. Is this the right time to buy? It's in the exact same situation as Plex, so that's very difficult to say at the moment. I think I personally want to see charts that look the exact opposite of this if I'm actually going to invest in something at the moment. So the small skill injector is still left. This one is also flat, maybe down a little bit even, but currently selling for 156 million ISK, one jump out, and in station 160 million ISK, and the buyers are at 150. Again, pretty narrow margin, as the Plex related markets are in a bit of hesitation mode because of everything that's happening. Apparently we are flat and on the lookout. Could this possibly be the right time to buy? Absolutely. Could this be a prelude to lower prices? That is possible as well. So right now we're basically going to have to wait and see and decide for ourselves what we expect the market forces to do here in the Plex markets. Let's move on to some minerals at 7:30. Alright, these could be a bit more interesting. Alright, I like this recovery from titanium. So these were going back down after reaching this pretty much 6 ISK price mark like 2 weeks ago. There was some danger of coming back down, but looks like demand is actually picking back up again. And so if we disregard these buyers that are much further away, we are at 5 ISK 85 for the sellers. We do see 1.5 billion coming in here, 700 million. We do see ample supplies, but 585 is still a pretty good price, and we're talking 2, 4, 6 sell orders, and then we're already at the 6 ISK as well. So I think that there is potential there to go back towards that, especially if you look at the bars 582, 581. They're smaller in volumes, but they are very close to the sell prices as well. So this surprised me a little bit that the first few buyers coming in here are extremely close to the sell prices, and this does show that there is strong demand. So does the recovery of the price point with the higher volumes. You know, if these volumes would have been dumping at high prices, we would actually have seen the price come back down more. So there is a lot of demand for titanium. Apparently, as long as it stays under 6 ISK, that's where most people are trying to pick it up. But with a bit of extra demand, maybe a couple of super losses or something like that, we could actually push above that at some point, and that would be very good news, I think, for the titanium market, maybe even for the mineral market in general. This would be a psychological barrier, I think, that would be very, very significant, because this would definitely show a recovery from titanium from the ascension changes, which is this massive dip that you're seeing here, which is of course the fact that CCP made the Rorcal so overpowered and made them just mine anything that was available in Nelsik in such massive quantities that they flooded the market. So that's what happened here. The recovery, if titanium can dip above 6 ISK, then that could be a very good sign, I think. For pyrite, you can see that the story is quite different. We were working on that recovery, but here the same pattern happened again. We were trying to go towards 7 ISK and then look at the massive volume dump. Unlike with titanium, this was bad news because you can see that the price decreased. So this was a massive dumping, trying to sell at these better prices, which have not been available for several months. Happens here again, but you can see that the volumes increased once again, driving the price back below 6 ISK, which is normally, considering the volumes that you're getting out of the ores, a little bit unnatural. Pyrite being sold for 5.7 ISK, which is less than titanium, while you're getting more titanium normally out of the volumes that you mine. And the buyers are at 569, so very tiny margin here as well. With a bit of demand, we could go towards higher prices decently quickly, but apparently there are still such big pyrite stocks available out there that any sell opportunity is massively squashed by an attempt at big sales. Let's move on to Mexalon, our favorite mineral, especially for the Isaac miners, because that one, you can see that ascension happened here in November. We had this temporary dip, but then the market quickly found out that Mexalon turned out to be the bottleneck of available minerals in nullsec, and thus demand kept staying really high, and we managed to keep a price of above 70 ISK for most of this time. And even now we went up to 80 ISK not that long ago, and at the moment 76 on average is still a very, very good price. So this is definitely the mineral to focus on if you're mining in HiSec. 76.41 for the sellers and 74.44 for the buyers. Again, decently narrow margin. It's looking here again. You can see a higher peak, a lower bottom here, and then a stabilization in between this. Just like with the plex market, it looks like the market is trying to stabilize a little bit and is maybe in a bit of a wait and see period at the moment, which makes it very tricky to decide on investments, because pyrite's constantly being drawn back down here. This would be one that personally looks like a very interesting chart to me, but it's you do feel like this is a very big gamble, especially because the other ones aren't having the impact on their increase in price and their sustained high prices like here with Mexalon. But yeah, if I had to take a gamble, I would make that move on pyrite, because it is a natural that it costs less than titanium. Let's move on to Isogen then, which is the exact same story as pyrite. This has really been the story of the last few EVE talks. Titanium and Mexalon doing really well and should definitely be your focus. And pyrite and Isogen trying to crawl out of that hole, but never managing to do so. Here again you see mid-June that we increased in price towards 60 ISK, and then the volumes came in, crashing the price back down below 50. We meandered there for a while. We try again here in September to go towards 60 ISK, but here are the volumes again, crashing the price back down. So Isogen is back at less than 50 ISK for the sellers, 47.48 for the buyers. Very, very cheap Isogen, historically speaking, on the chart as well. But is this the right buy? I think it could be, but if you have a lot of patience, because this has been going on since the Ascension expansion, there is not really any sign that either the resource wars or any of the new content in the winter expansion is going to change this dynamic. And so as a result, I would say that you definitely shouldn't overbuy this, but I'm keeping my stocks ready for Isogen and for pyrite when they actually come back into their natural orders, which should be titanium the cheapest, then pyrite, then Mexalon, and then Isogen. And these two are in reverse order, which well, at some point should rectify itself, I think. Finally, we also have Noxium. That one has been doing okay, actually. It's been one of those minerals that, if you've been following for a couple of years, you know has been hit the hardest by the CCP bat because of changes to the compositions in nullsec. This just became oversupplied. This used to cost like 900 ISK or 1000 ISK, and then we dropped down to like the 600-700 ranges for quite a while. Then Ascension hit here, and at a very low price point already of 450, we dipped to below 300 ISK for Noxium, which was completely unheard of. But this one managed to do a bit more of a sustained comeback at the tail end here. We even dipped above 400 ISK. We had to give that back, but we are staying just below that. So Noxium is being sold for 394 ISK and the buyers are at 376, which historically speaking is terrible, but considering this 1-year chart is actually a pretty damn good price, pretty close to the pre-ascension prices as well. So Noxium doing alright, that market is balancing out a little bit. For Nullsec we have Zydrine back at a high point of 1200 ISK, that's quite interesting. 1181 for the sellers, 1152 for the buyers. Again, pretty narrow margin, seemingly a new normal price range for Zydrine here is in the works. That's how I'm reading this. If we were going to dip back to 1100 ISK, then you should see buyers go back down to like very close to that price point. Here they're actually being forced up a little bit, so I think that we are in for some sustained higher prices for Zydrine here. And then we've got Megasite that is doing this climb in a more normal pattern for a sustained higher prices. So you would see our price go up. At some point, of course, the market can't keep going up, and so we give back a little bit of ground as people decide that, yeah, well, I'm willing to sell my investments at this price range. But here we're not going back down. With Zydrine, you saw that we were constantly testing back at the 1100 here. Although, yeah, again, you can see this as a step up. But going back down to 1100 didn't seem like very good news. But if you look at Megasite here, we have this slow step up towards higher prices. So yeah, it definitely looks like we're gonna be paying more for Nullsec minerals in the foreseeable future. One thing to note on that end, of course, is that the CO2, the end of CO2, basically the end of the war there, could bring the goons back into full swing when it comes to mining, and that could actually be a determining factor in what happens in the Nullsec minerals. So this could be your time to sell if you expect the goons to go back into full mining mode and to flood the market with these minerals. But Megasite selling at 1430 ISK, definitely a pretty high price. 1365 ISK for the buyers. If we look at where that is on chart, 1365, it's pretty much to that previous bottom here, so they haven't been forced up all too much. I think that this 1375 is basically going to be the price point that will hover around if I look at the buyers here of Megasite. They're not being overly forced up. If you would see something like 1380 here, then yeah, we're definitely gonna settle closer to the 1400 ranges here. But yeah, at the moment, definitely a bit of pressure from demand on Nullsec prices to go up to be a little bit more expensive. And finally, we have a Morphite that has basically had its peak up to almost 13,000 ISK on a single day, but it's very hard to actually make that trade. But 12,000 was definitely possible for several days and quite decent volume. So remember, for almost a whole year, except for this one price spike in January, you could have picked up some Morphite at like 8,000 to 9,000 ISK pretty easily, probably even less than 8,000 ISK on the bars as well on some of these dips. I had some investments in that. I sold a little bit early at around 11k. Your potential was definitely 12,000 ISK. It's still being sold now for 11,500 ISK, and the buyers are at almost 11,000 ISK. So still not bad. If you're a little bit late to sell your Morphite, you can still do so. But the peak is over, and with the end of the war as well, I think that we will start to normalize here very quickly in Morphite, and that we'll see the same thing happen potentially in Megasite. This could actually be over because the war ended as well, this increase in price that we're seeing here since August. And that was it for the minerals. Let's move on to some PI at 1830. Let's go. Construction blocks, let's see what those are doing. Heading back above 13,000 ISK. I do think that with the new refineries on CC, with more people preparing for this, we're generally in a high demand situation for PI. Maybe the fuel related ones might be the exception, but at the moment, construction blocks selling for 14,000 ISK. The buyers at 12,400. I would say that the sellers are well above average. The buyers just a bit above average here on the construction blocks. They're pretty plentiful in general, but a good time to sell for sure. Consumer electronics next, also hovering back towards well above average here. 15,000 on the charts, 16,200 for the sellers, 14,800 for the buyers. Definitely well above average. This must be one of those refined PI materials that you need in order to produce some of those advanced ones that you need for the structures. So this one, definitely a great time to sell that if you have some consumer electronics lying around. Coolants is probably a little bit different because it's fuel related. Exactly. We're still seeing decently strong demand even at the tail end. 5-day moving average crossing the 20-day moving average on the upswing. 12,500 for the sellers though. That's around average. 11,600 for the buyers is maybe even a little bit below average. So decently cheap coolants at the moment. This would be one where I would say if you want to sell, you could do so, but have the patience to put up a sell order. And if you're gonna hold on to this, I definitely wouldn't blame you. You can see that on like a bit more demand here, 16,000 is possible. And another thing to keep in mind, of course, the refineries are coming. All those services will have to be put online. All those moon drills will have to be put online. The reaction services, all of that will cost fuel. And if everyone jumps on it, then maybe you can try to time it right. When do you expect, like maybe 50% of nullsec or 70% of nullsec to have completed most of their refineries, to have brought everything online? That's when you should see peak demand for fuel. And so from that perspective, I personally would hold on to stuff like coolants, anything that's related to fuel production, until after the expansion, where I would expect a surge in demand to potentially have an impact on all of this. Enriched uranium next, that's actually related to fuels and is actually selling pretty well. 17,000 for the sellers, 16,700 for the buyers. Definitely well above average on the chart. This is one that you can sell without a second thought. Integrity response drones next, that's one of those advanced PI materials that I was talking about, directly related to structures, so very high demand, and of course we're paying that premium because of that. 3.4 million for the sellers, 3.2 million for the buyers. It's basically market demand is so high now that we're paying probably $1 million more than what we did just about 2 months ago. So the bottom here was probably early July, when you could have picked them up for less than 2.5 million. I would have expected maybe like an August to September bottom. That never really materialized, although here you can see a little bit of that one. And the culprit on that, I think, is basically CCP, when they dropped that bomb on us that the expansion was coming in October. Whereas I think most people would have expected the winter expansion November, December. As a result, the entire timetable that I was expecting has been pushed back by 1 to 2 months. And this is the result. I completely missed it, by the way. I was looking out for it, but I was thinking July, that's too early. We're gonna see a second one because we still have so much time. Turns out we didn't have that much time, and I missed it. Next up, we've got mechanical parts related to fuels once again. 13,000 on the chart, 12,900 for the sellers, 11,800 for the buyers. Sellers tiny bit above average, buyers around average, I would say, maybe a bit below that even. It's pretty wide margin. This again, just like coolants, I would say, maybe if you're expecting that fuel boom, then you could hold on to it. Definitely, if you want to sell it, have the patience for a sell order. Nuclear reactors next, on big volumes, back up towards 130,000 is a very interesting one. This is actually a late one to the list here, but I'm actually liking this one. Look at this chart, it's so full of potential. 75,000 or 80,000 as buy opportunities several times this year, and then you've got these peaks at 150 even, 130 sustained, 130 here, above 130 here, again 130 here. Very nice PI material if you're looking for something to try some trading in, because you can clearly see that if we dip below 100,000 ISK, that's where you've got your nice buy opportunities, very recognizable, and the potential for high prices comes back decently often. Very interesting one. Nuclear reactors selling for 135,000 ISK, buyers are up to 121,000. Definitely not bad. If here in July again, the early bottom, you could say you could have bought these for like 85,000 ISK. That's a nice chunk of money that you're making right here. Oxygen next. And maybe I should say this peak here, this volume spike is probably related to the structures, absolutely. But what is a little bit different here are the swings that you're seeing, despite the fact that all of this is pre-ascension. And so I feel like this one has a bit more volatility in it for some reason. Very interesting in my book. Oxygen next, sustaining 550, although here at the tail end we're quite a bit lower. So let's take a look at the sellers. 678 is for the sellers. Very, very good price for Oxygen. Pretty crazy for a processed PI material to see this being sustained for so long. And then the buyers are at 561. So you could get away right now, I think, with trying to focus on Oxygen if you have that as part of your cycle. And if you have extra Oxygen out there, just bring that to the market, because you're selling it at a very nice premium at the moment. Robotics next, fuel related. That one is actually under pressure a little bit, which is, it's a specialized, so it's at the same level, you could say, as the nuclear reactors, but it's a completely different chart with really one sustained peak up there. And so this one is now slowly dropping down. Sellers are at 107,000 ISK and the buyers at 100,000 ISK, and this is probably a touch above average, but it's possible that with inflation 100,000 has become the normal. But if we ever really dip below that, especially on the buyer side of things, then I would say that robotics could end up in a buy opportunity as well. But again, I think that with the expansion, this is related to fuels. We'll see this boom in demand, and we'll probably see robotics shoot up because of that as well. Rocket fuel next is coming back to 12.5, one weird data point here. So let's take a quick look at the sellers. 13,700, a bit above average. Buyers at 12,200, probably around average here for rocket fuel. So this one, a bit of a weird one. I still remember that before this happened here in mid-January, this was an extremely stable chart on the 5 and the 20-day moving averages, just extremely flat in this 11.25 to 12.5k range. The median daily price have always been a little bit crazy in the rocket fuel market, you know, always all over the place. But then here with this sustained increase in price up to 15k on a couple occasions, since then rocket fuel has been behaving a little bit more strangely, although the median daily prices here make more sense on a downward trend. You're constantly below the entire chart, and then here on the upward trend, well, that's where, you know, this is a little bit weird that we have these median prices here, 11k, and that then we swing up all of a sudden. But yeah, it's a weird one, but I think that we have to keep in mind that before this happened, like let's say the second half of the year, this was a super stable one. This was not one that I would have ever picked as a potential gamble for a trade or something like that. But here now, yeah, again the July bottom down to almost 10,000 ISK, and now you're already selling it again at 14,000 ISK. It's not great, but it has this dynamic to it at least. Next up, self-harmonizing power cores. That is, of course, obviously structure related, and these are now costing 3.5 million and the buyers are at 3.2 million, with again this early July bottom that I didn't catch, unfortunately. Some did though, you can see that on the volumes. Next up, superconductors, up to 15k in a decently sustained manner, so there is not that much to say. 16,500 for the sellers, very good price, well above average. Buyers are at 14,000 ISK, also well above average. Superconductors definitely on the sell at the moment, I would say. Test cultures next. Finally, this is happening. So we saw like 6 months of straight bottom prices touching 7,500 on the chart for quite a few times, and here finally test cultures shot up. 12,000 for the sellers, 10,300 for the buyers. So if, like me, you had this investment of test cultures, because after this decrease in price, this looked so promising here when we were playing with 7,500 on the median daily prices, but the volatility just never came back. Here now finally an increase in price and a sell opportunity in test cultures, which I already took advantage of. So if you have some of those lying around, you can definitely sell them as well your patience will finally have been rewarded. And finally, the wetware mainframes, of course, also shooting up quite substantially. 3.5 million for the sellers, 3.3 million for the buyers. A bit more of a premium on the buyers for this compared to the power cores and the response drones. And I think that this is normal because our previous experiences has been that wetware mainframes have basically become the bottleneck when it comes to these PI related materials for structures. And so as a result, you tend to have to pay even a little bit more of a premium on these mainframes as well. Again, look at early July, it's even a late June bottom here of almost 2 million for the mainframes. Great opportunity, of course. That would have been 1.5 million per piece that you would have made in profits right now if you're willing to sell, of course. So yeah, unfortunately, when it comes to this PI market, this time with the launch of the new structures, I mistimed it and I completely missed it. I never made any investments in these guys, which is quite unfortunate, but yeah, that's just the nature of the game here. There are potentially other structures on the horizon that'll give us another opportunity. Keep that in mind, of course. We potentially have the gates coming out at some point. That's probably going to be a massive project that will require, if the current structures are any indication, massive amounts of these advanced PI materials. And of course, we also know that CCP is thinking or potentially working on the propaganda towers, which of course would be another set of structures and thus another opportunity potentially to grab this type of an investment. But yeah, the timing is very important, and this year didn't work out for me. Maybe I'll touch on this now. Water-cooled CPU, why am I adding this to the quick bar but not to the list here? It's a personal investment of mine, so you can see on this chart here that we were and still are meandering here at this price of like less than 9,000 ISK. Buyers dipped actually below that, I think, and no, actually just above that, and I actually picked up some water-cooled CPU, but maybe a couple 100 million or something like that. Not a massive investment, but I think I'm going to try and keep a close eye on them by just adding investments that I make to this quick bar here. And so if you want to follow up with what's happening there as well, it's a tool for me personally, but you know, it's going to be visible in EVE Talk as well. Then you know if I made an investment, you know what it is, and then you'll also be able to call me out when it turns out that will have been a pretty bad one. But I bought some water-cooled CPUs here for like 9,000 ISK, just around there, I think. So yeah, that's just something that I'm going to start filling up here whenever I make investments. Maybe not all of them. Maybe I'll keep some of them a bit of a secret. We'll see how it works out. Let's move on to some Tech 1 chips at 31.45. I basically think that with the hesitation in the minerals to really go anywhere, same with Plex, that this isn't gonna do much. Here is the Abaddon settling at around 190 on the chart, 191 million for the sellers. You can again see the lack of activity in the Tech 1 battleship market, 176.6 million for the buyers. Yeah, volumes, they're just abysmal, right? 13 a day, 15 a day, maybe if we're lucky. It's pretty bad. The Tech 1 battleships are just not in the meta. You do see them flown when, you know, they need to like take down structures, then something like an Abaddon makes sense. But generally, the large Gnostic groups do prefer to go for faction battleships. And so while there are exceptions to this rule, in general, when it comes to EVE Online, these Tech 1 battleships are actually pretty rarely flown, and so this market is not doing too well. The Caracal is of course a mainstay of nullsec and PvP in general, I would say. So this one has known this nice little uptick up to 11 million, but I think that's gonna be over by now. Sellers are down to 10.8 million, still okay, probably making some money on that. Buyers down to 9.4 million though. And any fresh supply is going to keep putting that pressure on the price to go back towards the 9.5 to 10 million range, I think potentially with higher titanium prices, we could start to see a bit of a premium form up compared to the lower prices after the Ascension expansion. That's maybe something to keep in mind, of course. The Coveter next going up in price a little bit, up to 30 million ISK apparently, 31 for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. Not so bad. Bit surprised by that. Volumes picking up as well, heading towards 100. Sometimes you can see here on this stable period, definitely not. And then here that's more dumping to drive the price down. So Coveters, okay, not bad. A little bit of a comeback there. Ferox also picking back up in price. On volumes, maybe, yeah, you can definitely see some volumes here when the prices went below 50 million, pushing the price back up, currently being sold for 58 million ISK. And the buyers at 52 million ISK. I'm actually a bit surprised by this, you know, Coveter moving a bit. Ferox, definitely a move made on that as well. Interesting, not what I expected. I thought it would stabilize a bit more. Hurricane next, let's take a look. That one is stabilizing though, that is pretty obvious. So Hurricane is flown, I think by test, a decent amount, and so here we've got the volume for the war. Increase in price went up to, let's say, well, you've got this price up to 70 million, that's going to be an anomaly, but above 55 million, but the pattern that you should see here is that the peaks keep being lower and then the drops keep being higher as well. And so we're settling back at the trade range just below 50 million, 52 for the sellers, 45.7 for the buyers. And that's more the pattern that I was expecting to start to show up. Maelstrom next, this one on the way back down to 180, but again what you should see here with the battleships are the abysmal volumes. Availability not that great, there's probably 30 of them or so on the market. 180 million for the sellers, 162 for the buyers. Prophecy next, also obviously pretty stable, just above 50 million ISK. Availability pretty terrible, 52.7 million for the sellers and 47 million for the buyers. That again here, look at the volumes. This is a battle cruiser that's actually pretty damn tanky. Missiles, drones, it's definitely not bad, and it's just not moving. There's just no demand for this Tech 1 stuff at the moment. Scythe next, after the late war jump in the Scythe. This was actually a suggestion from a viewer. We're normalizing back down to 8 million pretty quick. 8.5 million for the sellers, 7.8 million for the buyers. So the Scythe spike is basically over. But if we stay above this 8 million, then you could start to see this higher titanium price, higher Nozick mineral prices start to make their way into this Tech 1 market as well, so that we won't be playing potentially with the same bottoms as before. That could be interesting. The Typhoon next, this was actually a bit, I should say maybe even more unusual, that while it went up to 200 million because it was a main doctrine for the Imperium, the response was so overwhelming that we actually drove the price back down to 130 million and are basically stabilizing back where we were before. So this one not a big winner of the war profiteering and of being a part of a main doctrine of the largest group in the game. 160 million for the sellers, 145 for the buyers. Very cheap prices, and again you can see the volumes basically going back down into nothingness. And then the Vexor, oh, a little bit of a late spike in the Vexor. That's quite interesting. Maybe it was some speculation on the or maybe it is because of the rebalance of some of these alpha clone chips. That's possible. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing to the Vexor, but just not a lot of availability. Selling for 11.3 million. Buyers are just above 10 million. If you have some Vexors or you can make them quickly, then you could potentially definitely make a little bit of ISK on the current margin. As always, I expect that to be dropping very, very quickly though. Next up, the Tech 2 market at 37.30. A little bit later than that, but alright. Let's take a look at these here again. I think we're gonna see pretty much the same story as last week. I think most people are holding off on the Tech 2 market, both on the sellers and the buyers. Maybe some buyers coming in here and there, but especially the sellers, because we don't exactly know what the changes to the moon mining mechanic is going to mean for the Tech 2 market in general. And so at the moment, basically after the war, lots of prices were up and so we're just not going to play with the previous bottoms. Aries, for instance, we would have to see buyers close to 20 million. Currently 23 million for the buyers, 27 million for the sellers. That's just, you know, if you still have some of those that you bought for 20 million lying around, sure, you can still sell them, but you know, to make the investments at the moment is probably not in the books. The claw next, massive spike up to 50 million, currently being sold for 27 million, buyers are 25 million, so that again is not the price range we're looking for. The crow, I think we can basically, well, maybe we'll look at the charts as well, but here went up to 30 million twice in fact, and is currently being sold for 28 million, buyers are 26 million. Again, crow's always been a bit more expensive, but 22 to 23 million is what you're looking for on the buyer side of things. So yeah, again, not gonna work out right now. The Aries is an interdictor, actually at a high price point, dropping off a little bit on the median daily prices here, but again, definitely not in buy order territory. 58 million for the sellers, 51 for the buyers. You can still try to sell these, but again, the producers I don't think are gonna rush all their Aries to the market, because if there is enough disruption with the moon mining mechanic, or if let's say that the volumes aren't what people are expecting, then it actually be the right move to just keep trickling in, keep these prices well above average, and then watch and see what the market does. And if you have some extra lying around, market actually goes up in price, then you could actually make more money on what you're producing right now. Potentially that is still in the books. Here is the flycatcher next, also pretty stable at around 70 million ISK, 69 for the sellers, 64 for the buyers. Again, you're looking for like 50 million on the for a buy opportunity. Heretic next, also at a high point, 69 million for the sellers, 60 million for the buyers. It's the exact same story. Maybe there's even some buyers coming in for these Tech 2 ships as well, driving up the price. So why would producers rush their volumes to the market at the moment? It just doesn't make sense, and they are going to keep the prices well above average at the moment. The Hound next, very similar story, selling for 29 million, buyers at 24.7 million. Hounds, we've seen buy opportunities at 18 million and even less, I think. Malediction, also again at a pretty high price point, 33 million for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers. Very expensive at the moment. Manticore, price spike up to 37.5 million, settling well above the rest of the chart, selling for almost 30 million, buyers 25.6 million. Again, it's what we expect, and it's definitely happening. Here is the Nemesis. Again, we would be looking for 20 million or less on the buyers. It's at 21.3 million. That's probably the closest one. 25 million for the seller. So if you want to still like make an investment in the Tech 2 market, again, the Nemesis looks like potentially the most interesting one. The Purifier here, again, pretty high point, 27.6 for the sellers, 26.5 for the buyers. Very, very expensive, historically speaking. And the Saber also really nicely expensive at 70 million almost for the sellers, and 63 million for the buyers for a Saber. Yeah, good times to be a producer of Tech 2 ships, bad times to be an investor in those. Next up we have the Tech 3 market at 42 minutes. There we go. As always, we'll start with the destroyers, and those should start to stabilize right after the war. We saw those massively used. Very, very interesting information. But of course, with everything dying down here, we are coming back down a little bit. Still, the Confessor selling for 45 million, almost 48 in fact, and the buyers are at 42 million. Not a bad price at all. Let's take a look at the Haggerty chart. Also under pressure a little bit, of course, selling for 55 million, buyers at 45 million. But what you should notice here, 115, 48, several more sellers of 10 and 16 coming in. Availability is going to start to grow, I think, 10, 35, 27 here again. Quite decent availability. This is slowly going to put a pressure on the price. Will we reach 30 million again? I personally don't think so, because I think the market will have learned their lesson from this, is that Nullsec is very actively going to use these ships in any future conflict. Jackdaw next, 47.5, first one coming in. you know, so they were selling for like 54, 55 million, 53 million, 52.5 million, and then it's 47.5 million. Normally you'd say, all right, no big deal, that gets picked up pretty quickly, and then we're gonna get back to going down from 52.5 million. But no, this is 355 units, so this is probably going to start to form a new platform from which the sellers are going to start to compete down on. And so this is what I was talking about. Potentially wormhole space is really stable, so we are probably going to get oversupplied and start to see pressure on these destroyers. And then finally we also have the Zwepel. You can see again a little bit under pressure, and 82, 24, 11, it's starting to trickle in at 40 million for the sellers and 35 million for the buyers. So what are the cruisers doing? Probably a similar story. I think that it just takes a little bit of time to absorb the changes here, but production potentially still out there, and that's exactly what we see happening here. Look at that, 240, 226 and 37 of them coming to the market. I mean, you're not gonna see prices above 150 million anytime soon unless something drastic happens, which I don't think is in the cards. So 148 million for the sellers, 135 for the buyers. For the Legion, again, very strong availability. The Loki picking back up a little bit. This is the winner of the changes. So 208 million for the sellers, 170 for the buyers. And the availability here, you do still have 164, 34, 20, another 11, another 12. So I think that eventually this one will start to settle on a downward trend as well. Proteus, yeah, the worst performing one. Right here, 123 for the sellers, 110 for the buyers. Very cheap compared to anything else, and still you see 100 of them coming in right here, which is just gonna keep adding pressure. And finally we also have the Tengu that is currently settling just above 150 million, and then here that's what I was expecting, to be honest. 100, 100, another 100, another 100, another 100. 64 of them, 52 of them. Oh, are we not going to compete here? No, we're gonna start with 180 at 156 million is start competing from this point on. So this is pretty crazy. But you're starting to see the volumes, the overproduction in the Tech 3 market take over again. And so it turns out that even more than the Tech 2 ship market, the Tech 3 market is very high potential when it comes to a Gnostic war at the moment. In my opinion, this is really interesting. If you look at what the Hecate has done here, that's pretty crazy. And then the Jackdaw as well, Imperium Doctrine. It was short-lived, but you could have picked those guys up for like 30 million, no problem, in pretty big volume, in really big volumes in fact, and now you're still selling them at like 50 million, which is like a very nice profit on this one. It's something that we have to keep in mind when we start hearing the war drums again in Nosec. When that's gonna happen, who knows, of course. Moving on to the extra products at 4620. I have two requests and I am going to honor those. So first of all, someone wanted me to take a look at the Hulk, which shot up in price, and yes it did, very nice. So good eye here, up to 350 million almost for the sellers of Hulks, currently selling for 339 million. Bars are 310 million, and yeah, bit of sustained higher volumes to be seen here. What is happening? Very difficult to say. Maybe one thing that is possible is that some big groups are expecting Hulks to become their moon mining ship of choice, because perhaps they expect more traps to be potentially laid in those belts that are player created. But you can also, from looking at the graphics, you can also yourself as an enemy potentially gauge when it's gonna happen and just have a trap ready. And so maybe that's why they're not gonna immediately pour all their Orcals on this, and so they want some Hulk fleets ready as well, which are going to be, you know, Hulk with maybe one Orcal or Hulk with an Orca. It's much less ISK on the field, but it's gonna get through a belt like that decently quickly. And so they might have calculated that risk reward wise, it's gonna be better to take a fleet like that out than to fill everything up with Rorquals, especially because, well, as I've said, an enemy can potentially gauge when it's gonna happen. They'll have this window of opportunity to set up a trap, And as a result, yeah, maybe rorquals won't be used right away in the moon mining. So very good suggestion here. Hulks up in price quite substantially all of a sudden. Another potential, of course, is a CSM leak. Maybe another rorqual nerf might be on the books, who knows, but haven't really heard anything about that myself. And the other question was for the ice products, so everything related to ice. So I think that's here, materials, and then we go for ice products. So let's take a look at these. Here is heavy water, for instance. Above average, I would say, but decently stable and not outrageously expensive. 428 for the sellers, 411 for the buyers. So we are seeing strong demand with the buyers well above average and the sellers as well, but it's not completely out of line, I would say. Helium isotopes next, also definitely above average, actually coming down a little bit from a pretty high point here. So 653 for the sellers, 627 for the buyers, well above average as well. Hydrogen isotopes definitely above average too. Here at a decently high point, currently selling for 684, 647. Was there potential in trade here? Yep, keep in mind if you can pick this up below 600 ISK, that seems to be the nice opportunity for the market for picking up some really cheap hydrogen isotopes. We're not there now, but it's something to keep in mind. Helium isotopes a little bit more difficult to gauge, but definitely again below 600 is not so bad. And then heavy water, considering where we started off, is even trickier to tell. Liquid ozone next, actually at a low point. This is quite interesting. I think that you'll see that on the quick bar pretty soon. Liquid ozone selling for way less than the ISK, 88.77 for the sellers, 85.69 for the buyers. Liquid ozone, 1 year low, well below the entire chart. Very interesting in my opinion. This is the kind of chart that I do like to see when I have some ISK lying around to invest in. So that is for your consideration right here. It's from ice products. Most of them are above average. Liquid ozone, 1 year low all of a sudden. Nitrogen isotopes back up to above 700 ISK. Here we don't even ever get this one below 600. So below 650 is probably your opportunity on this one. Selling for 734. Bars up to 700 ISK as well. A bit above average again. Oxygen isotopes, let's take a look at that one. Very weird chart at the tail end, under pressure but still selling probably above average. 720 for the sellers, 659 for the buyers though. That one is quite a bit lower here. I don't think that the buyers are willing to move up on oxygen isotopes, thus creating these drops much more quickly here. So oxygen isotopes still okay to sell. The buyers are probably actually threading the buy opportunity range. And then finally strontium, also pretty low at a 1 year low here at 5,400 on the chart, selling for 5,700, buyers at 5,300. So I would say that, yeah, very interesting. Most of the isotopes and the heavy water are above average, but the strontium and the liquid ozone are at 1 year lows. Potentially there is an investment to be made there. Very good suggestion. Thank you very much for that. And that's going to be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.